Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, John Christ, who will be speaking on the history of Pemigewasset hotels. John is a faculty member at Plymouth State University, where he teaches courses in the social sciences. His research explores the development of modern and contemporary culture with a focus on such themes as tourism, creative placemaking, cultural institutions, and the power of the arts to shape a democratic society. So without further ado, I'll pass this over to John. John?
Thank you, Dick, for the introduction, and Plymouth Historical Society for inviting me here tonight. And thank you all for coming and joining me on this journey through the Pemigewasset House and its history. And I would have loved to see you all in a busy room together at the old courthouse and point to some of the artifacts on the walls as I'm speaking. There are a few things I know exactly where they are in the walls. It would be fun to actually see them as I'm speaking. But here we are, and I've got reproductions of them all, so it should be all fun. And of course, right behind me, I've got the Pemigewasset House, the second one that we also see in front of us on the screen. And that's going to be our topic tonight. Really all three of the Pemigewasset houses, but I think a special focus on the second one that we see here. So this hotel played a very important role, not only in Plymouth's history, but in the history of shaping the landscape for the development of American tourism. And as we go through this narrative and look at the history and the details of this hotel as it developed over time, there are several other themes I just want to kind of weave through this narrative. The broader story of Plymouth to some extent, but then how Plymouth itself served as a gateway, as it was often called, to the White Mountains. And you see the increasing number of people coming through Plymouth then, at times to enjoy, and increasingly to enjoy, what Plymouth itself and the Pemigewasset Valley had to offer, but also to go up north to the White Mountains, to just stop here briefly as a waypoint sometimes for the landscape tourism further north as well. So that's all going to be in play, and in fact, that's where we're going to start this evening. And they would visit the Pemigewasset House. They would visit the other grand hotels further north. And so I also want to, keep in play that broader development of the travel infrastructure. And especially for the Pemigewasset House, we'll see, this was really key to understanding its important place in this history as it relates to the railroad, to some of the turnpikes, especially the railroad though, and as it served as this hub of a lot of activities in the 19th and into the early 20th century to build the New England infrastructure of tourism and beyond. So to step back for a moment to the big picture and the creation of lots of big pictures by these individuals. The history of landscape tourism, which is really central to the history of the Pemigewasset House, starts, we usually say, in the Catskill Mountains of New York, and we see some pictures here of the Catskill Mountain House in New York. And from there, it spreads to the White Mountains and other places that jump on this growing bandwagon of commercial development of the mountains for the views and for tourists. Who's going? Why are they going? There are lots of answers to this question, but certainly one of the prime answers is they're responding to very quick urbanization and industrialization in the 19th century, and those with the means to do so are trying to escape that from time to time. So for the most part, we're talking about an urban audience, a white audience, and a middle class audience who had the means to leave the city and take part in what were often quite expensive sojourns into the mountains. So they were trying to get away from the rapid urbanization and industrialization for a moment, even though they were often part of that history back home, and seek out a little outdoor recreation and to try to find some kind of health for themselves and even for society. So for themselves, they often saw it as physically, personally healthful, to rejuvenate themselves, to enjoy the fresh air, the fresh scenery of the mountains. But they often also saw something bigger going on, that by enjoying and immersing themselves in what they described somewhat erroneously as this pristine wilderness, they would also find some kind of spiritual, moral renewal and uplift. And then finally, one of my own favorite topics, which I'm not going to get very deeply invested in tonight, landscape tourism also played a really important role in building an American identity in what we call nation building. And there was a belief in the exceptionalism of America, of course, in many ways. One of these was this belief in the uniqueness of the American wilderness and the role of that in building an American identity. But I'm going to try to keep it at that for tonight, as tempting as a subject as that is for me. What's more important for us is how individuals learned to appreciate the landscape, what kind of social rituals, physical rituals they learned to partake in, and how they learned these. They didn't just know naturally necessarily how to adventure. They had to learn how to adventure, how to strike a pose, how to see in the land landscapes. And they weren't just seeing and looking, but crucial to this as well, and we see the people on the picture on the left there, they were being seen seeing. Seeing itself was a spectacle to behold by others. Here's one of my favorite pictures that has entered my repertoire since I think it was early last summer that this appeared, or spring. It made the rounds of the internet for a little while. So at the hotels and through paintings and postcards, visitors, even our bear here perhaps, are taught to visually consume the land by engaging these rituals. We're given the chairs, we're given the views, we're given the model of other people doing this to imitate, and we learn. So our visual appreciation of the land might seem fully natural, as if a bear could do it, right? But it is an acquired behavior. We do not merely wake up one morning, utter some monosyllabic grunts, our paws stretched across the balustrades, and frame a view with our mind's eye, marveling at its natural beauty. Again, it's something we learn. And what does our bear see with his eyes? The sublime majesty of Mount Washington, of course. So, we learn to view the mountains then in part because hotels are designed and to teach us how to view the mountains and the landscape, and how to sit, how to look out, and we can see this again and again in lots of different examples. Here is the Crawford House in Crawford Notch. We don't actually see the Crawford House, but we see the view from Crawford House, framed by the porch of Crawford House, looking out into the notch. So the hotel frames our experiences, manages our experiences, trains our sensibilities. And like artists, we learn how to see these consumable landscapes in the land. So tourism more and more starts to define our economy, as is logging and other things, but it's one of these major points in our economy. And we have not only the hotels then that we'll be talking about, but the guidebooks as well, and the paintings and the prints and everything else, the postcards, teaching us how to experienced this land. And there's several of these books here that I'll be quoting from a little bit later, including famously Starr King's Guide to the White Hills and the Switzerland of America and Franconia Notch and so forth. So by the time we get to the mountains then, more often than not, we aren't so much seeking some novel view that we've never seen before. Instead, we're seeking out a view that we've already seen reproduced in so many guidebooks and postcards and paintings that when we get there, we're looking for this authentic experience. But we're also looking for an experience that we've been promised, that we've already seen, that's already familiar to us. So let's get closer back again to Plymouth and how it fits into this narrative. So Plymouth then plays this dual role in serving the growing clientele of landscape tourists coming up north to the White Mountains. At once, it's a waypoint on a longer journey to go somewhere else. They might get out briefly from their train, have a meal, get back on their way again. They might stay overnight. But also, the Pemigewasset Valley on its own serves as an attraction for many people. And what are they looking at? They might be looking at Livermore Falls. So this is an advertisement for the Pemigewasset House. And we see on the top right Livermore Falls. We see views of the Pemigewasset Valley and other things they might see in and around Plymouth while they're staying here. So the Pemigewasset House and other local hotels and other businesses are trying to promote the Pemigewasset Valley alongside Franconia Notch, alongside at the upper end of Pemigewasset Valley, and alongside Crawford Notch, Mount Washington, as among these sites. And it gets a lot of support, as we'll see later, in that regard. So to start the narrative, where does this all start? So the prehistory of the Pemigewasset House starts with the building you're looking at on your left, or at least you're seeing part of on your left. So in 1764, David Webster establishes a residence in Plymouth right off of Main Street. And it's not a very big place. It's usually described as some kind of log cabin sort of structure. And you see a bit of the stables there and part of the other structure in the picture here. As time goes on, it seems that he starts to invite guests, and his residence becomes the Webster Tavern. And he's starting to see some success in this. He and his son, William, around 1800, decide they want to expand, and they build the structure you see with the gambrel roof on the right, the enlarged new Webster Tavern. And how do you know it's a place to stay? It's got the typical signage. You see the big pole there with a sign hanging off of it, which often resided right outside the front of many taverns and hotels of the period. So we start to see the ambitions grow. It's still here in 1800 as Webster Tavern. Webster himself is playing multiple duties in town and in the region. He's operating this hotel. Over time, as his son's growing up, his son takes on more and more of that role. He's also working for a time as sheriff of Grafton County. But the thing to keep in mind when we're talking about Webster Tavern at this point is that this is all still, around 1800, this is before the rise of landscape tourism. There really aren't that many people coming through. It's also before the train arrives. So you have pretty small groups of people coming through at this point. Why are they coming? One of the reasons they seem to be coming is to go to one of the two seats of the Grafton County courts in Plymouth. And so you have lawyers and others for the court coming through, and whatever other travelers are passing through the region. However, if you look closely at this picture, you'll see on the roof, almost like a roof cone, there's a sign that says not Webster Tavern, but Pemigewasset House. And this is where our narrative is heading, of course. So in 1841, William Webster sells the Webster Tavern to Denison Burnham. And this is now the time when the tourist industry is starting, not huge yet, but it's starting to pick up. And Burnham, of course, doesn't want to run Webster Tavern, so he decides to change the name. It could have been to Burnham Tavern, but he seems to have bigger ambitions. And he wants it not just to be about his self and his name, but he's, how do you lure in a bigger clientele with a kind of regional attraction? You name it after the river and valley you're in, the Pemigewasset House. And by all accounts of people who stayed there, he was a good innkeeper, a good host, and he kept livery stables for the coaches and other people that would be coming on horse in and out of town. And his number of visitors grow, his ambitions grow, and over time, the Pemigewasset House grows. And we'll see some pictures of that in one moment. But before we get there, it's also worth noting, and this is obviously a whole different story, but Burnham, in addition to running the Pemigewasset House, also played a role by several accounts in abolitionism and the local Underground Railroad. And his role parallels, in a smaller way, it seemed, that of the more noted Nathaniel Peabody Rogers, also working in this area. And just lastly, before we leave this photograph, if you think about when is this photograph taken, there's a way of dating this pretty well without even seeing any dates on it. If you can do a little detective work and you figure out, well, photography was invented and then made public in 1839 with the invention of the daguerreotype. So it's after that, right? 1843, the new name Pemigewasset House is adopted. So it's also after that. But we also know that by around 1850, the Pemigewasset House had gotten quite a lot bigger and was expanded. And that we don't see here. So it's somewhere in the late 1840s that we're looking at here. All right, stepping back for a moment to a bigger view of Plymouth. What do we see here? We see a nice idyllic view, Plymouth in the middle ground there. We see the Pemigewasset River coiling its way around, the Fayette Bridge going over the river. To the left, you might see the Baker River Valley, not the river itself necessarily, but certainly the valley. Looking way off into the distance, you see some pointy mountains, presumably Franconia Notch and Mount Lafayette and the rest of them. And then perhaps most importantly for us, if you look with my pointer right over here, you see a growing Pemigewasset House. And not only is it a growing Pemigewasset House, but by 1856, you see it's also met by the railroad, which becomes crucial to its evolving identity. And here it is a little bit later after several expansions. So you can see the original structure and the original signage way off on the left, the gambrel roofed early Pemigewasset House and tavern. On the right, you see all the additions to the structure to allow it to host upwards of 100 and then expanded again to 150 roughly guests. And we also see a picture here of Burnham. So as the crowds grow, facilitated by the railroad, so the Pemigewasset House grows with new accommodations, new rooms, new things to do, as we'll see, billiards and so forth. Big veranda wrapping around the outside. Off to the left, you can see people coming and going, by coach. You see someone arriving by horse on the right, being chased by a dog. There's several dogs running around in this picture for some reason, and lots of people outside the hotel seeming to socialize and enjoy the day. And here's a photograph of what is very much same scene. And by the way, if you're wondering to yourself, where is this in Plymouth? It is right off of Main Street, and it's a little bit pushed back off of Main Street. And I'll have a map for you in a few minutes. But roughly it is just south of Highland on the east side. But we'll see a map in a few minutes. Here we have an ad for and some promotional material for the Pemigewasset House. And I'm obviously not going to read through all the copy here, but you see this classic view of the Pemigewasset House, which is a side view. And we see lots of side views of the first and second Pemigewasset House, because it allows us to see a building with two important sides. There wasn't just the main front entrance on Main Street, but there was also this crucial back entrance that was the railroad entrance. And you see both of them here from the side. And what else do we see here? If we read through all the copy, we see that now Henry Greeley is the proprietor. And this is by the 1860s. And we also see the hotel boasting that it has the, quote, largest in the state dining hall, and so situated that travelers can step from their cars directly into the hall. A spacious and well-ventilated rooms, a telegraph office, a billiard saloon, and a bowling alley. And of course, the large verandas and lots of food and everything else. Now, before we get any further, there's a question that pops up sometimes about the first Pemigewasset House, which is, did Abraham Lincoln, ever visit the first Pemigewasset House? And here we see a couple of newspaper clippings about Lincoln visiting 75 years ago at the famous old Pemmy House and all. And the quick answer is no. His name does appear on the register in 1860. However, though he did visit New Hampshire in 1860, there is no record that he actually traveled as far as Plymouth. There's no record that he didn't, but there's also no record he did. And there is record that on that same day as he signed, or someone signed his name on the register in 1860, he was in Springfield, Illinois. So chances are maybe someone with the same name stayed there. More likely someone was having some fun. So here is something we could actually see if we were in the courthouse tonight. Here is a painting of the first Pemigewasset House done by a very young Abby Burnham Greenleaf. So this was painted in 1853 when she was 12 years old. Quite a good talent for a 12-year-old painter in her facility with paint and all. And so who is she? Abby Burnham Greenleaf, right? She's the daughter of Burnham, the original proprietor of the Pemigewasset House. And she makes us a picture that, if you're looking at it, it's a pretty accurate rendition of what the Pemigewasset House looks like. But what we don't really see is Plymouth. We see what is probably on Prospect off to the right. A lot of trees, some fences, and the Pemigewasset House, but not much of Plymouth itself. This meets the expectations of visitors in many regards. They want the beautiful amenities that the hotel has to offer, but they also want nature. And this is one of these paradoxes of the tourist industry, giving people an escape from civilization, an escape from the city that still provides them with all the luxuries that they're used to in their urban lives. And if you're wondering about her other name here, Greenleaf, Abby Burnham Greenleaf. She later married Charles Greenleaf, who is most famous for his role in running the Hotel Vendome, as well as in New Hampshire, the Profile and Flume houses in Franconia Notch. So she didn't go far from the hotel industry. And so often it ends in fire. It always seems to be fire with these hotels. So in 1862, the hotel burned beyond repair. We don't know too many details of how this all took place. There didn't seem to be a local paper in town yet, but it did burn. But the burning of the Pemigewasset house also provided opportunity for a rejuvenated, newer, more integrated Pemigewasset house. And that's what we see with the second Pemigewasset house. Building new, building bigger, building more opulent, building something more organized, not build hodgepodge at in several layers, and something even better integrated into the transit system, especially the train system. We also see at this point, because of that integration into the train system, that the hotel shifts ownership to the railroad, and the railroad itself shifts names many times as it gets consolidated and bought and sold and expanded. So I'm just going to say generically, the railroad under John Lyon buys the Pemigewasset house under the auspices of the Pemigewasset Hotel Company, and they build what's usually considered the grandest of the three, the second Pemigewasset house in the same location. So this all happened pretty quickly. So it burns down, and very quickly they start rebuilding. And they receive a large influx of capital and energy from the railroad. This was a main stop on the railroad going north to the White Mountains, but also north to Canada, and where it eventually went. And so they want this stop to work well for them. And so they take it over and really quickly rebuild and try to provide this really well integrated experience with a beautiful, grand, broad facade. And not being able to carry that forth all the way, they narrow it down in a T shape with a wing out the back to meet the newly built train station, which is integrated into the hotel. So you can get off the train and go right inside the hotel, entering right on the same level into a diner sort of experience that we'll see in a moment. Or walking up the stairs to the main floor, where you'll find a large dining hall and the lobby and everything else that you're looking for. So larger lodgings and two restaurants, really easily accessible. So if you get off the train for a half hour, you can pop in, grab some food, and leave again. All very well organized. And thank you again, Dick Flanders. You provided some, in addition to providing my introduction, you provided a while back some information on one of your relatives, a great uncle of yours who helped build the second Pemigewasset house back in 1863. And so you had access to his diaries of John Ellison when he was 46 years old. And we see him rebuilding, or helping, not obviously alone, rebuilding the hotel from roughly February through August, and working for his brother-in-law, then working for what he calls the corporation. And he describes his work doing a lot of window work, which seemed to be one of his specialties, framing work, furring. And certainly this season, as I was reading through these, what struck me most was every few days in the diary, you see this description of these rainstorms coming through. I'm like, where are the rainstorms? So probably not a very notable part of the diaries, but certainly notable this year when we're so lacking in them. So when the hotel opens, again, almost immediately, the descriptions of this really quickly built hotel are glowing. Without exception, we're told in 1863 as it's opening, the finest in the state. There are gaslit rooms that are large and commodious. The parlor is a large and spacious room, elegantly furnished, fronting the south. The dining room is a noble hall on the main floor, lighted by large windows and without a single column or pillar to mar its symmetry. And of course, there's the landscape. From Main Street, Plymouth, you don't get much of a landscape view. However, if you build a very large structure, you can. On the roof, we're told, is a large observatory, and we see it right there in the center, from which may be had a fine view of the valleys of the Baker and Pemigewasset rivers, and also of Lafayette, Osceola, and almost the entire range of the Waterville and Franconia Mountains. So we're going to make sure that visitors can get that view that they're looking for up Franconia Notch. The broad staircase leading to the second story opens to the office and hallway, from which you may enter the spacious and elegant parlors on the left, or the equally spacious and at dinner time more attractive dining hall on the right. The luxuries and delicacies of the season are served at the tables by attentive waiters, and the honors of the house are performed by mine host, C.M. Morse, Esquire, the genial, courteous, and capable manager of the establishment. His experience and well-known ability in this direction are a sufficient guarantee that nothing will be wanting in the entertainment of all who may come under his care. The luxuries of all markets, combined with the dainties from garden, lake, and stream, find their way to the tables from the magical realms of the kitchen to satisfy the most fastidious palate and to satiate the most voracious appetite. This is from the book Switzerland of America that we saw briefly earlier. So here are some pictures. I'll have some pictures of menus soon as well of this food we were hearing about. Here is the lobby. Here's the parlor and some other rooms, including on the right to two dining rooms. This smaller one on the bottom that meets the train station directly, and the larger one up top on the first floor. And take a look. I just noticed this yesterday, and it got me concerned for a moment that I was misidentifying some of the pictures. But look at the chairs. We're going to see those same chairs later. And yeah, I'm not certain if they had the same supplier, maybe a regional supplier making these same chairs for a while, or what the exact story is there. But those chairs remain consistent, it seems, for almost a century. There are prints of this hotel as well in some of the guidebooks. Here's Snow's Handbook of Northern Pleasure Travel. This is supposedly the dining room and lobby we're looking at here. I think a few liberties have been taken. It is one of the best in design and management in the state. Ascending the broad staircase, if it be in season of pleasure travel, you'll be saluted with music from a fine quadrille band. And the fine quadrille bands were touted over and over by these hotels and the guidebooks, often giving you listings of what they're going to be playing each night and so forth. And entering one of the finest dining halls in New England. Scrupulous neatness, excellent cookery, and quiet, ladylike attention, the purest of water, and the freshest of viands are the features of this hotel. The menus. So the menus evolve quite a bit over time. On the left, we're seeing a menu of the first Pemigewasset house. And you see it's a printed menu with all the actual menu items left blank, which are filled in by hand. And you have that classic view from the side of the hotel. As time goes on, you start to get these more generic printed menus. Here from, what's it, 1888? C.H. Martin is the manager here. And then as time goes further on, you have these smaller foldable menus, often with illustrations and pictures and embossed writing and ribbons and bows and all sorts of decorations to try to create a really special experience out of your time dining, not just in the food, but in every detail you might expect. So you do have quite a bit of evolution over time in the presentation of the menus. As far as what's on the menus, there's quite a lot of regularity. And you have, actually I have a little closer up view in a moment of another menu. What I did notice in some of these printed menus, you have what almost looks like, early 20th century modernist poetry with these really graphically done layouts, just, for pleasure and fun, creating all sorts of diagonals and graphics out of the menu items. On the right, I was searching for Pemigewasset House pictures, and I came across a eBay listing for some napkin rings, and they were sold already, but here they are. I'm not sure if these were a souvenir or if they were actually used in service. Here we go. So here's a foldable menu and description of the Pemigewasset House, also with train arrival schedules. But you see a fairly standard menu. Soup, fish, there's always some kind of boiled meat, usually several boiled meats. These are things we probably wouldn't see as often on a menu these days. A roast, usually of several different kinds, cold meats, and then various slightly more elaborate entrees. What do we have? Hashed turkey a l'espagnole, lamb cutlets breaded with tomato sauce, tripe a la lyonnaise, and probably the one that entices me the most, I'm not sure entices me to eat or just learn the answer to my curious questions, but calf's head, turtle style. I really have no idea what that is. If any of you know, I'd love to hear. Vegetables, relishes, pastries, and desserts. Calf's head, turtle style. Here's one of these later fold-out menus, and over time, which I'm sure many of you are probably familiar with. Here it is today. And here's my rig there today, or over this past winter. It's also worth looking at the colors of the Pemigewasset House a bit. The second Pemigewasset House, they changed over time. So this is the original color scheme we're looking at here in an earlier photograph, and it's notable for its dark trim that successfully set off the various architectural details with a certain finesse and eminence, I'd say. Later on, it was repainted, and with a much less appropriate, I would say, bit of white trim. There's still some of the dark left, but a lot of the trim is done in white, probably more in fashion with a lot of else what is being done in the hotel industry at the time, but not really kind of setting off the architectural details and such nearly as well, at least for my taste. Here's another view from the side. You can also see here how it's set back a bit from the road with a driveway and some lawn. So lots of famous people came through these places, fashionable guests as they were called. In the summer months, a brilliant center it is for a large number of fashionable guests from Boston, New York, and other cities, and of many who are doing the mountain region leisurely and deem their round of travel and pleasurable experience incomplete without a sojourn at this famous establishment. Among these famous guests was Nathaniel Hawthorne, and he is noted here for several reasons. First of all, he's obviously famous for writing The Scarlet Letter, House of Seven Gables, but also for writing stories about New Hampshire, including The Great Carbuncle, about the mountains, The Ambitious Guest about the Willie slide. And so he arrived in 1864, and it's for this trip that he's also, you know, very famous for his stay there. So this is, first of all, this is like less than a year after it reopened as the second Pemigewasset house. And he's traveling with the former US President, Franklin Pierce, not known to be one of our more celebrated presidents, but the two of them are traveling together. And what is his goal? It's to restore his failing health, hoping, as many people did visiting the White Mountains, that the fresh mountain air will do him well. Early the next morning, overnight basically, he was found dead in his room. It did not work. And by a few accounts, he was in room 9, right above the front entrance, when he died overnight, not making it quite to the White Mountains. All right, so if you've been like dying to find out, like, where is this place? So here is a bird's eye view of Plymouth. And where's there it is. Here's the bridge, and heading over here, you have the second Pemigewasset house. And Main Street, Highland, and Webster. Here a little zoomed in. So here's Highland coming down rather straight, perhaps slightly off of its current path. Not fully certain about that. And here is Webster, which currently stops right around here, then leading to a grassy field. But originally it had gone all the way down, framing the other side of the Pemigewasset house. So if we're thinking about contemporary Plymouth and you want to think, like, where is this in my own map today? Here's a Google map. And if you look over here, we have Highland Street coming onto Main. Here's Railroad Square, which wouldn't have existed, this road here. And here is Webster, stopping truncated right here, but originally going down here. So if you're thinking about this, you continue Webster, you continue Highland, you push the hotel back a little bit off of Main and meeting the train station. This is probably roughly, not very scientifically, what his footprint may have looked like.
The geometric shape is where it was?
Yeah.
All right, but also locating Plymouth with regard to the places beyond and the Pemigewasset house. There are many ways of getting around. One of them was by coach. And coaches stopped at the Pemigewasset house regularly. And it's important to keep in mind, you know, as the train arrived, the coach didn't go away because the train replaced it. For some trips, it did. But for many trips, in fact, the train brought additional customers because the train had a fairly set route along these nodal points on its tracks. And if you wanted to get to other places, and more people wanted to get to these other places, you needed another means of travel. You could walk, take a horse, but probably you take a coach, which is what we see here. So these are, you can see the Plymouth and Franconia Mountain coach on the right, and the Pemigewasset coach on the left, going past what is a little red schoolhouse. I wonder if it's that little red schoolhouse that's north of us still to this day, which was quite near some important sites and attractions in the Pemigewasset Valley. And lots of artists were spending time in that area. Where did these coaches travel? The Mayhew Turnpike, the Haverhill Turnpike, you know, present day 3A and 25. They were there since the early 19th century. Additionally, people traveled by coach, a lot of tourists traveled by coach north from Plymouth, up Main Street and toward Franconia Notch, up what is now Route 3. And the train didn't go there right away, as we'll see. And so you took the coach instead. Also on shorter trips, there are lots of short trips that people took from the hotel. One of the most popular short trips they took from the first hotel already and from the second as well was a kind of quick jaunt up Mount Prospect in Holderness. So you go across the river up to the top Mount Prospect, which was not as full of trees as it is now, and giving people what many described as quite magnificent views of the broader region. So there were ways within Plymouth that people really enjoyed, not just Livermore Falls and local attractions, but also the grand views that they were searching for. But of course, it's the train that really defines the Plymouth experience. And here you have one of many views of the rear of the hotel, where most guests would first arrive by train. And you see throngs of people waiting for the guests there on the rear balconies. And we see information about prices and reduced prices, the restaurant, the livery stable, the billiard and bowling alleys, all this sort of stuff. At the bottom, you also see the quadrille band that has been engaged for the season. So all this kind of standard stuff that we're getting used to seeing here. And the train would arrive in both directions at roughly lunch and dinner time. It seems to have changed a little bit over time, but roughly noon and about 5 o'clock. And it would arrive for a half hour and be quite a busy place for a little bit. So even when we're focusing on the front view, we still get the back view of the train and so many views of the train. An 1898 guidebook author writes, "In and out beneath the great Pemigewasset house, the depot, speed the long trains with their thousands of passengers. For a few moments, all is rush, excitement, and activity. Then the train darts onward, and when the echo of its whistle dies away, the town gives a gracious welcome to the lingering stranger, breathes on him the message of the blue peaks far away, and sinks back to its quiet daydreaming beneath its ancient elms." So many of the authors concentrate on the elms of Plymouth. And so you could look at these guidebooks, get your train schedule, figure out your whole itinerary. And in fact, oftentimes these guidebooks also had pictures of the views to expect. It had obviously the timetables, but it also had listings of the hotels and other attractions you'd be visiting. And they often provided a pretty good one-stop source for much of the information you would need to plan your journey. And here we see some maps of what those journeys would look like. I have a zoomed in view on the right, which takes you up to Plymouth right around here. So in 1844, a charter was granted to the Boston, Concord, and Montreal Railroad, which started heading up north. By 1850, it reached Plymouth right here. Then it kept going, first over to Woodsville and taking you north up to eventually Bethlehem and Fabians and Mount Washington, Crawford Notch. And if you wanted to poke down, the train eventually took you to the Profile House as well in Franconia Notch. It eventually started going up north as well. Never did it actually bridge this gap right here through the Notch. So even at the height of the railroad, there was always that last leg for many people that would be by coach or other means. And they would take you to places like this, the Profile House, the Crawford House, Fabians. Over time, lines get consolidated, rail lines get consolidated, the companies get consolidated, and the web of rail lines gets more and more full and complex. And here again is the train. So we have lots of visual culture tied to landscape tourism and these hotels. And at times it was prints and photographs in guidebooks. At times it was large paintings. And here it's a fairly large and intricately created print. The hotel we see takes center stage, topped by a large flag in the observation tower just below, and where one, of course, could get the famed views to the north and east. At street level, you can just barely make out in the background there the carriages and coaches that are being pulled about by horses in front of the hotel. As we move further back, we see the crowds of people waiting for the trains to come and go at the train station. And then the whole thing is being framed by the trees as we peer on from the Holderness side of the river. And we see the viewer, or we as the viewer, stand with the limbs of these trees framing our view across the river. You see lots of carefully placed groupings of figures in order, repose, gentle sociability, and yet with a spark of fun and excitement at times. We see the swing going, the running dog, someone with a hoop playing. So we know the natural view is important, but also just at times just fun outdoor recreation on, in, across the river, even with the pedestrian bridge here, taking people across the river to the Holderness side in this outdoor natural setting. So you could go for the views, but people had a lot of fun, obviously, doing other things as well. And abruptly, I show this. Again, there is fire. There was a danger and a nervousness a little bit earlier. 1891, the building was struck by lightning, but it was not severely damaged and did not cause any long-term harm. 1909, however, on May the 12th, a small fire was spotted in the attic, and it was spotted, maybe even in time. But the pressure from the hoses was not enough to reach the upper stories. And so they could not slow it down, and it spread, the wind was blowing, and pretty quickly the whole hotel succumbed to the fire, burnt again beyond repair. Embers blowing across the river as well in the wind, setting things in Holderness on fire. And there was a train pulling into the station during this whole escapade. It had to wait, watching the hotel burn down right in front of them, and we're a little bit off in the distance. And finally it passed after the fire had been somewhat suppressed, and they, as the story goes, at least from the accounts of those who saw this, sprayed their hoses all over the train and tracks as the train passed without stopping, and went along its journey. So the town loses its hotel and a defining business in the town. And the train, rail system also loses a really important stop along the rail line. And so what is going to happen? The train company decides it's not going to rebuild the hotel. It rebuilds the station and a restaurant along with it, but not the hotel. Why is this? Maybe it was too much of an investment. I don't really know. Maybe they saw the writing on the wall they saw the cars pulling up increasingly and saw a new mode of transportation coming that was going to displace the nodal travel of the rail in favor of something a bit more decentralized, like the car. Whatever the case, they did not get involved. And it took several years for a new hotel to get built again. And it wasn't clear from the beginning that it was going to be built again. I'm checking the time here. Okay. So it took several years to build a new hotel, and it was they basically didn't get any one individual to front the money for this, or one corporation. Instead, they used basically a subscription model, and got a lot of people involved who wanted to bring back the hotel. They could not bring it back to the same location. And instead they purchased the property of, or former property of Amos Kidder, who himself has a really interesting story in town that perhaps someone else can tell you about, if you don't know it already. And they also purchased one of the dormitories at the normal school, which they moved, and they put them together along with the new construction and created the third Pemigewasset house. So this was up the hill on Main Street on your left side, going up the hill. And so it's farther away now from the trains, but it did have a big driveway and was more amenable in many ways to the car traffic that increasingly defined landscape tourism in the 20th century. And it also had views from the first floor porches out onto the Pemigewasset Valley and beyond, which you did not have from Main Street. And so I have a few pictures of this more scaled down hotel. If you're looking, by the way, you'll notice that the rendering on the top has two towers to kind of frame the architecture and the facade. The matching tower, the Kidder house, did not get built. So you're looking at the bottom right picture here as well. You don't see that second tower. So here it is. Here's the lobby on the bottom right here. Here is the dining room on the top left, and you'll see those chairs again. I have an even closer view in a moment. The ladies' room on the bottom. And thank you, Marianne, if you're on the Zoom here, for providing this picture of the dining room, where we can see your parents at a Rotary meeting, as well as a bit of the wallpaper, those chairs again that we saw at the second Pemigewasset house, and the fact that you did get more of a view out the windows of this now moved, but also scaled back Pemigewasset house. So this is the 1950s. This is getting close to the end of our history of the Pemigewasset house here. But before leaving, it's worth noting that the Pemigewasset house also got involved in the cottage business that a lot of hotels started to get involved in since the 19th century. So not only having the large central hotel, but also smaller cottages for those who preferred that experience and could afford that experience. And I don't know if there were more than one, but there's definitely this one here that has been labeled as the Pemigewasset cottage in some of its materials. And if this looks familiar to you, it's because it currently has students residing in it in Plymouth. Here it is on Pleasant Street today, or about a year ago, I guess, and with much greener grass than this summer. And so if you're thinking about this, if you go through the backyard and take down some fences and such, you're in the property of Plymouth State, and you're in the property that was very close by the property of the third Pemigewasset house. Here are some of its promotional materials, taking on the look of the 20th century style brochure that we still have in many respects and quite often today. Again, there was a fire, this one in 1934. It did not destroy the hotel though. There were lots of onlookers, and the fire department came and managed to put it out and save the hotel for a little while longer. But eventually the hotel was shut down and sold. In 1959, it was sold to the First National Stores for development of a 15,000 square foot supermarket. That seems to have fallen through and not gone anywhere. A year following, Plymouth State College bought it, and the Pemigewasset house was removed and replaced eventually by the Pemigewasset Hall, Lamson Library, all in that area there. It's amazing how jarring contemporary pictures are after looking at all the old photographs and prints. So before rounding out, I just want to say a few words about the broader region that was an attraction to people. Because this was, again, not just a waypoint, it was also a destination. Mount Prospect, Livermore Falls, the views of the valley. There were lots of things that people talked about that one could do without even going further up north into the heart of the White Mountains. Here we have an advertisement for the Pemigewasset House. So obviously, tooting its own horn here a little bit. From the summit of Mount Prospect, the most grand and picturesque view can be obtained of New Hampshire scenery. The view of the lake and mountain region is unrivaled, and from no other point in the state can such a view be obtained. That is a little hyperbolic. But at the same time, there are lots of other people mimicking this sort of rhetoric. Whether they learned it or really agree with it is hard to say, but you see this quite frequently. This lovely valley still bears the soft, smooth, flowing syllables of its Indian name. It is the valley of the winding water among the mountain pines. The Pemigewasset River rises in a little mountain tarn, which nestling between the massive buttresses of Mount Cannon and the lofty tower of Eagle Cliff is watched over by the great stone face. So this is obviously the Notch to the north, and guarded by the frowning cliffs of Mount Lafayette. Very descriptive text. Then the little stream goes singing and leaping over its rocky bed past lofty peaks, by shady pools and foamy waterfalls, joined by countless rills and brooklets. Outside the gateway of the Notch, like a herald of golden rays sent forward to proclaim the presence of the king, stands Plymouth, the shire town of Grafton County. Round about its wide curves, the Pemigewasset River sweeps over the shining sands, or dreams the hours away between the broad meadows set with noble arching elms. Or this advertisement again for the Pemigewasset House. On entering the Pemigewasset Valley at Plymouth, the scenery assumes beautiful combinations of lines and scenic effects. The whole region, both on the river and inland, is made up of grand panoramic views of choice bits from which the artist readily fills his sketchbook. And we can see here, you have the road off to the left. Mostly, though, it's the train that pulls us, the viewer, and our surrogates in the foreground there, into the landscape, pulls us right into the Pemigewasset House, the valley, and then eventually into the Franconia Notch in the background. And many artists did fill their sketchbooks. Artists were often the first ones to blaze these paths and try to find the views that others would try to then replicate over time in the tourist industry. And Thomas Cole was, often credited with founding the Hudson River School of Painting and really kind of paving the way for landscape painting and appreciation in North America. And he went pretty early on, late 1820s, up to New Hampshire, checked out the sites and made sketches. And this is a work from a sketch somewhere between Plymouth and Franconia Notch that he describes in his diaries as he's, walking south towards Plymouth before the Pemigewasset House in the days of Webster Tavern. And he's sketching the scenery of the Pemigewasset Valley. And I just want to briefly mention in passing, there was also Starr King View, which Starr King, this eminent writer of this guidebook to the mountains of New Hampshire, the White Hills, described as one of the most beautiful views in all the state. This is just north of Plymouth in West Campton. So we have the Starr King View cabins there, a stereoscopic view of Starr King View, a picture of the Stag and Hounds on the right, where many artists stayed while they were staying in the region of the Pemigewasset Valley, just north of Plymouth. So lots of people were attracted to this place over time. And paintings of this view, again, just a few miles north of Plymouth. So it wasn't merely the gateway to the White Mountains, although it did serve that purpose. But it offered to many some prime views of their own. I'm just going to read my closing here. I had originally planned to open this evening's talk by musing on a passage from Kenneth Graham's Wind in the Willows, and then on the sadness, but also hilarity and always absurd discomfort that fills John Irving's novel, The Hotel in New Hampshire. I realized when I was going way over time, I just cut this a few hours ago. It was still there recently. I hope to highlight the way the hotel serves as an aspirational dream of community, of the good life, class-based sociability, and of course, trained bears. I also wanted to meditate on the melancholy and tragedy that these hotels often leave in their wake, leaving us, as Graham tells us, a bit, quote, unsettled, depressed, and inclined to be querulous. The Pemigewasset house and the dreams it embodied are gone. But we are, or we do, to quote Irving, we do keep passing the open windows, hopefully, passing the escape routes, of which Irving warns, and persevering into the future and whatever our next venture here in Plymouth or beyond may be. Thank you all. I hope you enjoyed. If there are any questions, I'd love to be able to answer them.
This is Don O'Connor. Can I ask a question or two?
Absolutely.
Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Really, really enjoyable. One of the things that I find very interesting is to try to identify the locations of these hotels. And your overlay map on the second one was excellent. And I take that to be a footprint from about where the Fat Fish is on Main Street today, as far south as maybe where the Flying Monkey Theater is.
I think it's actually not quite as far as the Flying Monkey.
Yeah.
If you look at where Webster comes down,
yeah.
Webster comes down before the Flying Monkey. It's right near where the new bubble tea place just opened up, is where Webster would have come down. So it's not quite as far as the Flying Monkey. I was actually talking to Steve Rand, and he was saying when the road going down the hill was dug up at some point, they found what is probably in the middle of that road, the old foundation of the Pemigewasset house.
Is that so?
So that was probably where the corner was, in the middle of what is now that road. Another reason to believe that Highland, or River Street, I guess that's called, would have been pushed over a little bit further north than it is today.
Okay. Now on your diagram or photograph of the first Pemigewasset house.
Oh, that's I'm not even going to go back all the way. Okay, yeah.
Which I'm sorry. Oh, did I interrupt you?
No, I was going to go back to the other one. Now I'm switching around here. Yeah, go ahead.
On the diagram of the first Pemigewasset house, if you look at that drawing, it almost shows part of the structure of the original Webster house on the left side of the building.
Is that this one we're looking at?
It was very early in your presentation.
Is it this one here?
Yeah, later than that. You know, if there, I think that's, yes, yeah, no, go, yeah, okay, that one right there.
Okay.
Now look over on the far left. That looks like the roof of the Webster house.
Yeah, so this is the gambrel roof of not the original Webster Tavern.
You don't think so?
It would be even further to the left, but the one they built around 1800.
No, where do you think that was? Do you think that's where Rand's Hardware is today and where Noise Insurance is?
Supposedly this is actually in the same site, meeting the train station in the same place as the second Pemigewasset house.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Now my last comment was, very interestingly, you talked about the Pemigewasset house getting water from the Crystal Spring.
Yes.
And if I was trying to correlate the time frame, it looked like the occupation of the hotel at the time was 100 to 150 people, I would reckon the staff to be 50 to 100 more. So the water requirements on a daily basis of 200 people, you wonder how they got it from the Crystal Spring up to the hotel. That's a lot of water.
I imagine it's some kind of horse-drawn cart full of water.
You must have.
And you have to remember, you say like it can house up to, a couple hundred people. You also have the trains coming through.
Yeah.
And the trains are bringing passing visitors who are just crowding the dining areas and then leaving again, in addition to the actual paying customers who are staying there.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
The water requirement must have been dramatic. And there was, I don't think there wasn't piping from the Crystal Springs. That's downhill, I think, from where the Pemmy House is. They couldn't have got the water up there.
Not that I'm aware of.
No. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Are there other questions?
Any more comments?
An interesting thing, John, when you show your opening slide and your closing, when you show your opening slide and your closing slide, actually, I'm responsible for the property that's on the Holderness side. That's our Pemigewasset Riverside Park.
Yep.
That's owned by the Conservation Commission. And when you look at that little bridge, probably back about 15 years ago, we had a group of people, I think from UMass or someplace down south, that came up north and did a charrette. And one of the things that they proposed in their charrette was to have a bridge go across from about where the Rotary Amphitheater is to our Riverside Park. And then they were gonna, in that same charrette, they said, we ought to put a youth hostel on that Holderness side of that bridge.
That would be interesting.
It never came to fruition because this is just a bunch of architects that were, thinking out of the box, so to speak. But
I was going to say,
it is interesting that there was a bridge there apparently back in that time period.
Yeah, and I can't imagine this is a permanent bridge. It probably has with some kind of temporary like floating structure or something they put in place, because no bridge would necessarily survive the ice dams and everything else that goes on there over the winter.
I was going to say, yeah, right. And the floods in the springtime. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you for the comment.
Other comments for John?
John, this is Judy.
Hello. I can hear you.
If the hotel if the original taverns were up by the corner of Highland and Main, were the train tracks in a different location than they are now? If the train tracks were meeting the hotel, that seems like a big leap.
I've thought about this, and you look at pictures like this, and the river has moved over time, and this looks very close to the river, right? But the hotel was pushed back a little bit from Main. So there's Main, and then there's a driveway and some green space in front of the hotel. So it does push it back a bit, and it makes the leap to the train tracks not quite as great. And I haven't actually tried to measure the whole thing out to see exactly where it should meet and to see if it all works the way I think it does in my head. So I don't know an exact answer to your question. I think it's possible that they haven't moved. It's also possible they have. I'm not really certain.
Is it possible for you to show me the slide again of the map of where they were?
Sure.
I don't know how hard that would be.
Let's see if I can get there again. It's quite a ways in here, I think. No, sorry about this. Couldn't be too much further now. Okay, here we are. Okay, so here's the drawing from the period. And you can see how much it's set back from Main.
Okay.
And
where is the Pemmy house in that?
Oh, in the drawing?
Yeah.
So the Pemmy house is right here.
Okay, I see. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Perfect.
I would like to comment. This is Rhonda Gannon.
Hi.
Hi, I want to say how surprisingly clear it is to be able to see the old pictures and things like this map that are so small in reality, and the way that they are presented with you on the side and then the beautiful pictures. It's really pleasurable to have viewed this.
Thank you.
So many wonderful pictures. Thank you so much.
It was fun learning about this, and apparently there's a whole lot more to learn about. Louise was mentioning that there's a whole lot of new stuff that just came in on the third Pemigewasset house, which I haven't even had a chance to peek at yet.
That's wonderful.
If I could comment again about these, this particular image here. On my computer up on the top right, there's something called view options. And on this zoom thing, you can go like to 150%
Yep.
or more and get unbelievable close-ups on these images. And that's part one. But part two, this image also strikes me that you can see where the, I've got a cursor on my computer, but it's probably not showing on yours.
No.
Where the town common is. Those look to be what were called in early American times as liberty poles.
Okay. Yeah.
See those two long poles?
I do.
And I've often thought about those as to whether those are what were referred to as liberty poles in early America and how long they stood on the common.
That's a good question.
And opposite them is the row of 10-footers that we
Yep.
sometimes see reference to in Plymouth history. That's where Rands and Noyes are today, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think the building that has been changing a couple of times in its ownership recently, or it's who's running the businesses there at least. Right here, what it is right here after those 10-footers, and that's where Highland originally came down.
Okay.
Straighter, I think. That's the hunch I have here, at least, anyway.
That most recently was Anderson's Bakery, and then the brewery, and
Exactly. Yeah. Now it's Stir or something, right?
Yeah. But the other buildings along the town common there, the courthouse and the Congregational Church, and what was called the Brick, which is now the post office on the corner of Highland and Main Street, they're all very identifiable.
It should also be noted, in the days of Webster Tavern, the post office was inside the tavern for some time.
No kidding.
Yeah, they had some amount of, I forgot if it was, I think it may have been William, who was involved with the post office and serving as a regional postmaster or something along those lines. And I mean, the hotels really relied on having close integration, all the hotels did, with the postal system. And they often had some kind of, like, even multiple pickups a day out of the hotels. But in this case, he integrated the post office right into the hotel.
Really? Well, the detail on these drawings is unbelievable. If you enlarge them to look at every single building, you can see the windows and the doors, and the details of the architecture is remarkable on the hand drawing.
Yeah, these are fun to look at.
Yeah.
Other comments for John? Anybody else want to weigh in?
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. This is my name is Kathy. I have two quick questions. I just noticed as we were looking at this picture that the bridge appears to be covered.
Yes, there was a covered bridge for quite some time.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Back when it was the Fayette Bridge, when a lot of things were named after Lafayette after his visit.
Wow, that's interesting. The other thing is that your discussion of the water from the spring led me to question what were the facilities like, the toilet facilities in these hotels and the septic requirements. What was going on there?
I don't know about the first Pemigewasset house. By the time of the second Pemigewasset house, we have bathrooms definitely in the building, and sometimes directly attached to rooms. I'm not certain about the first Pemigewasset house and what its situation was, though.
So we must have had some,
Yeah.
some kind of a septic system going on.
From Dick Flanders. I was on Plymouth Village Water and Sewer Board for a number of years. They took quite a bit of pride at that time of having their facilities sewered directly to the Pemi River.
Okay.
So they can get rid of their waste efficiently.
Oh dear.
Oh,
Well,
dear.
at the time, that was a great idea, it seemed, right? And
And you can imagine how smelly it was in the summertime
yeah.
under those low
Wow.
conditions. Yeah, that's progress. They took a lot of pride in the fact that the sewers were connected. All these houses that we see in the photo were sewered directly to the river. And that was the way they did it back in the day.
I mean, we still have sewage going down into the lakes region, in the lakes there.
We do.
Scary.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
That was a great presentation.
Thank you all. Thank you, John, for your fascinating historical look at Plymouth's early tourism and hotels. And thanks again to Diane for hosting our presentation tonight. And thank you all for participating via Zoom and for continuing to support Pease Public Library and the Plymouth Historical Society. Hope to see you all again soon.